Welcome to Taking the Higher Road, a podcast by DriverReach in partnership with FreightWaves. I'm your host, Jeremy Reymer, founder of DriverReach, a modern software solution at the intersection of recruiting and compliance. With over 20 years in the trucking industry, both on the carrier side as well as the vendor side, I bring a wealth of expertise around all things recruiting, retention, and compliance. And on this show, I interview industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insight to the driver lifecycle as we discuss the industry's greatest challenges from recruitment and retention to the realm of compliance. Your positive feedback keeps us motivated, so don't forget to rate and review Taking the Higher Road on your preferred platform. This week, I'm excited to be joined by an industry friend and leader in recruiting who was an early adopter of internet and social recruiting long before it became the standard. Jason Crowell, Director of Recruitment at Custom Commodities Transport. So glad to have you on the show, Jason.
Great to be here, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've known each other quite some time. It's great to be here. I can't believe that I'm a podcast guest, but I'll do what you need me to do here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you've got a rich background in recruiting, onboarding, training, and retention. I'd love to talk about your earliest days, what attracted you to the trucking industry and how your innovative approach to driver recruitment has led to the success you've had in your career. And I also know that you're very passionate about how important truck drivers are. And on the heels of National Truck Driver Appreciation Week, especially, I'd like to unpack a recent thought-provoking LinkedIn article you wrote. And full disclosure to the audience, Jason's also a DriverReach customer, so perhaps you can share how you're leveraging the platform to achieve success. And then lastly, we'll answer a question from a listener during our deeper dive segment. Think we can get all that done today?
Sounds great. Absolutely.
Now, before we dive in, I am curious if you have any book recommendations for the audience. Anything recent you read that maybe was impactful to you?
Yeah, well, I always have a book going in the background. It's usually listening, not with having a physical book. But I just finished one last night, The In-Between by Hadley Vlahas. It's a book about a nurse. She's a hospice nurse caring for patients in the end of days. And she tells stories of what the patients went through and some very interesting things, not a religious perspective and not an atheistic perspective, but an eternal perspective anyway of what people go through. And every day this is happening. Really interesting read, and I recommend it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it sounds like a very perspective orienting type of book in prioritization, even if it's, towards the end. It's yeah, intriguing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, sir.
If we can start at the beginning, what was your background prior to getting into the trucking industry?
Sure. Well, I had been trying to be a rock star for years, actually moving to the big cities, New York City and all that stuff, and ended up with a skill of gardening. I had been gardening even at the World Trade Center before the big, 9/11 happened. And when I settled down and decided to do what I'm going to do, I had to cut my hair and get a real job. And the first thing that came along was a third-party recruiting agency. And I started out in manufacturing recruiting and happened to love what I was doing, helping people with how they support their families and whatnot. And starting out in third-party recruiting really gave me a scrappy background. And it was the entry-level jobs at the packaging firm, really interesting way to get going with it. But I soon, 3 years into it, determined that corporate recruiting was a better move for me because I lived with the people I hired. Third party, you kind of say goodbye after you hire and, you move on to your next thing. Working at a corporation, you're allowed to work with the guy you hired last week. And that's the side of the business I like a lot better is the relationships that we develop with the people that we've helped.
And it starts with that first interaction, right? It starts with that first interaction that you have and on the recruiting side. And as you work with them through the process and they become part of the team, then it's that camaraderie that you built, you can maintain. You can't do that, as you said, in the third party sort of environment. So what was it that led you to the trucking industry then? And how do you feel that background may have, helped you right away?
So I needed a way to move to Colorado back in maybe 16 years ago or something. I needed a way to get to Colorado. And at that point, and periodically over the years, the oil field had been sucking drivers out of the regular CDL market. And that was happening in 2007, right when I was needing to come to Colorado. And so the oil field in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, North Dakota was just about to boom, boom, boom. And I got in on the beginning of that. Not only were drivers needed in the oil field, but then because everybody left to go find their fortune in North Dakota, there was a need everywhere. So Western Colorado is where I hung my hat, and we started recruiting pretty darn quickly for the oil field. And I did that for a good 10 years in oil field trucking, in different markets down in Texas, up in North Dakota, all across the country. And oil field trucking is really where I got my start.
Well, now you're the director of recruiting for Custom Commodities Transport. And I know there's another role that you have, right? Your dream job, really. Could you share a little bit about that? Getting personal here.
Yeah, the greatest job on the planet. I am the grandpa. I have 7 grandbabies, but believe it or not, I live with 2 of them. Mom and dad live in the same home. All 3 of us work from home, and the 2 are homeschooled. So this is quite a place. I'm having the time of my life, Jeremy.
I can imagine, and I know. I think that's the reward for having children, right? Is having grandchildren. I hear that all the time. Now, I'm in no rush. My kids are still pretty young, so I'm in no rush. I'm enjoying these days, but that's exciting, and I know that that's a big deal, and so I wanted to share that with the audience. Could you also share a little about Custom Commodities Transport? Kind of maybe where you're located, what do you haul, that sort of thing?
Sure. Custom Commodities Transport is a mid-size tanker company. We haul commodities. 3/4 of what we're doing is dry bulk pneumatic tank. And a lot of the product for those tankers originate in the Gulf Coast. So we have terminals scattered throughout the Southeast, primarily, like East Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, down in those directions are where a lot of our freight originates. We do a liquid tank with chemicals as well, but most of the freight is kind of originating down there and then going across the country. So it's bulk freight. We hire professional truck drivers. We're not one of those hiring entry-level folks or anything like that. It's really the seasoned veteran that comes here. It finds a niche market.
Well, I know we were talking earlier about driver shortage, and I was recently hosted on FreightWaves Now with Bill Priestley to discuss the topic of the driver shortage, whether there really is one or not, and kind of sort of having a debate. And I know you've got some thoughts on this topic as well, and you prefer to call it a supply and demand crisis. Can you explain the distinction and why you believe this terminology is more accurate?
Well, I think we have to agree. If you're looking at the real stats in real America, there's not a shortage. There's enough truck drivers if we look at the math. But I think the culture that we've created in these last 10, 15 years, and I say we because trucking companies were part of it, drivers were part of it, maybe ad agencies were part of it, and vendors were part of it. We created a market and an employment experience that incorporated turnover into it. It wasn't the right thing to do, but that's what we live with right now, where we have a transient workforce that goes from job to job, and it's natural for the driver, it's natural for the company, it's natural for a vendor who wants to sell something to the company. And so we built it in like a cost of doing business turnover. And that is a problem. Obviously, it's not where anybody wants to be. And that's where my work is right now, in changing the image of the American truck driver and changing the employment experience for the profession, really.
Well, I know there's a lot to unpack there, and you're right. Purely by numbers, there are enough drivers. I wonder how many of them that are actual quote unquote CDL holders are actually working in a CDL capacity. I think that's a thing, and I think and I have a lot of thoughts around the importance of reducing the minimum age, and that's there's a whole nother conversation I think we can have. But at the end of the day, when I think you have a systemic issue when you have the average age of a new entrant in the industry in their mid to late 30s, when the minimum age is 21, I think that's just a systemic problem. But that all being said, you're 100% spot on that we have we have created and then embraced this very transient aspect of the driver, life cycle. They're constantly, there's turnover is just part of the equation. It's unfortunate. I think we've built that monster, and I think it takes a lot more than just me and you to try to fix that. Now, if we can, let's switch gears to technology a little bit. In your view, what role, as I said at the top, you have always embraced technology. You've been a thought leader, in an area before it was really a thing. And I am curious, in your view, what role can technology and innovation play in shaping the future of the industry, particularly in terms of talent acquisition and retention?
Sure. Well, all the way through my career, it's been interesting. I love what I do, but all the way through from the beginning, I've sort of been at the forefront. I feel like, in any case, I was a recruiter before we all had computers on our desk, even before there was a computer. And then when the internet came along, remember that monster.com Super Bowl ad? I was there for that. And we started using the World Wide Web to recruit. And then smartphones came along, and then video on the fly and social media came along. And all those steps, I was luckily in the seat already and kind of in the pioneer spot to be able to do these things. Anybody my age, I'm 55 years old, and people that are my age that have been in the industry doing this job all these years were part of that same kind of revolution. Dr. John Sullivan called it the golden age of recruiting. And it's a golden age for recruiters because of those technology tools, but it's also a golden age for the candidates who are using similar tools. They can look at a review for us. They can do online research and find out an awful lot about where they're going to apply for a job than they could before these tools were in place. So I feel like the technology has got us into having candidates, having prospects, and even having a general public better educated about what a company does, and even perhaps some of what the brand of that company is. And you got a flavor for what the company is before you even interact with them. And that's sort of where I live.
Well, you made a great point about the fact that it's not just for the recruiter, but also the technology and the evolution or revolution, as you said, has also impacts the driver, the candidate. And you've been using DriverReach for at least a couple of years. Would you mind maybe sharing with the audience how you're leveraging the platform to achieve success, and perhaps share what other solutions you may also be using for recruiting and retention purposes?
Sure. So I had come into the trucking industry originally without an applicant tracking system, an ATS. I didn't use any at all. And we kind of, because of the FMCSA mandates, needed to have certain things build out and build at home, and, homegrown systems. Like there may be mid-sized trucking companies that still do, there certainly are, that still do that. And that's where I came from. So I saw one being built at one point, and then I did get another job. I've had like 2 or 3 jobs in trucking over these 12 years, 13 years that I've been in the industry. And the next job I got, we had an ATS, and the ATS was, phenomenal. It's what a recruiter needs. If you have a certain number of applicants, of course, you're going to need a way to organize them and a way to walk them through the legislated system, the way things need to go per the DOT guidelines and whatnot. So I had a great ATS that worked and everything. And when I switched jobs, I looked at DriverReach. It's been almost 3 years now that we've looked at DriverReach and some different features that your applicant tracking system has in tandem with some safety systems, some filing systems, it makes it pretty easy to do some of the tasks that human resources might need to do, or the safety department might need to do, kind of all in one place. And it's been a solution for us, and we leverage it. Well, we leverage it in many ways. It's a broad, robust system. So the way I use it is to communicate, because that's my job, is communication. So we are able to talk to people who didn't apply for a job last week. They applied maybe 4 years ago, but are still wanting to understand what we're doing, where we are. And so we are able to speak to people who are kind of interested, people who are only interested in this one or two specific things, and we can speak to them about that. We can talk to the people who are in process of looking for a job and evaluating different employers, and we can talk to people who today are looking for a job right now, and we can talk to the people who already work here. And that's not a manual process when you have a tool like DriverReach. I can communicate with all those groups of candidates and employees through the systems that are set up through DriverReach. So I appreciate the technology and definitely use it. I think I could use it even more fully. There's so much in there, that I have to learn more about it to use it to its fullest. But yeah, we do certainly use a lot of the different features that are that come from DriverReach for sure.
Yeah, the CRM functionality kind of that you're talking about, I think that's important, right? And this is not a plug on DriverReach as much as it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, engaging with drivers, the candidates. They have phones, right? So communicating with them via text is something that's really important. Communicating them via email, obviously still being able to make phone calls. It's touching the people, but leveraging technology to improve that engagement. And I think it's a good segue to the next question or maybe point that I want to make is that even with the best technology at your fingertips, this is and always will be a people business. It's critical that we maintain or improve the human interaction and experience whenever possible. And if you could, maybe share how do you define a successful recruiter in today's trucking industry, and how has maybe that role evolved to become more relational rather than transactional?
Sure, thank you. The way I talk about the recruiter function is it's about relationship. It's about talking to people. If you like to talk to people about their lives, about what they want to do, about their aspirations, about their hardships, about their life, then you could be a recruiter, because there's a whole bunch of little functions, psychologists sometimes, helper, basically. There's a whole bunch of little things that a recruiter does that fall into the realm of relationship. We're forming relationships with folks to determine what their best next move is. And sometimes that is to get a job with me, yes. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's to go do something else or to go get some experience. But oftentimes it's a recruiter is here to help a candidate with decisions that they're making. And it's providing a whole bunch of information to allow a family, perhaps a spouse sometimes is involved, to evaluate, an opportunity or a decision tree, like a fork in the road. Do I want to do that? Or how do I want my life to look? Do I want my schedule to be like that? A recruiter is the one who kind of guides a process through for a job seeker. And, of course, sometimes that's getting the win, getting the hire and everything. Sometimes they equate recruiting with sales. And, so there's some of that lines up, but oftentimes it doesn't, because you're just not going to sell more hot dogs and, you're not going to hire more drivers and it's a big success. That's not how it goes necessarily. Really, the goal of a recruiter is to have a workforce, not to just keep hiring people, but to have a sustainable, productive, engaged workforce. And, we even called the employee retention to be like, if it's sales, if recruiting is sales, then that's our recurring revenue. Retention is the recruiter's recurring revenue model. You know what I mean? And certainly it does contribute to company revenue. If you're holding on to good employees, it not only contributes to revenue, but of course, profitability in the end. If you're not turning people over and having to hire new ones and having empty trucks sit in the meantime and having to advertise, you're contributing to revenue generation and the bottom line for sure.
Yeah, and improve safety and compliance, which also kind of to your point, contributes to the bottom line. Now, you wrote a great article on LinkedIn recently about Driver Appreciation Week, and I'd like to unpack that if possible. You touched on sign-on bonuses. You referenced the importance of engaging with your drivers and providing a feedback channel for them. And you also mentioned how some companies are not very thoughtful with how they show appreciation, especially during National Truck Driver Appreciation Week. And I think it's a good opportunity probably a good segue into our deeper dive question. And the question is, can you provide any best practices for Truck Driver Appreciation Week to make it special for our drivers?
Sure. The way that I approach it, and I'm glad that the United States sets aside a week that we appreciate these guys. But the way I approach it is that appreciation is, 24/7. The cool part about appreciation is that it's free. We can appreciate without spending, and we can appreciate without being someone's boss. We can appreciate peers. We can appreciate, executives. We can appreciate no matter what. So appreciation is just a human need. And when we serve that human need, then people are more fulfilled, I guess, in their job. So Driver Appreciation Week gives us the opportunity to kind of shout that from the mountaintops, to do some extras. And the article that I talked about had an example, and it's a major organization where I heard a candidate lament the fact that during Driver Appreciation Week one year, they were serving snow cones back at the terminal while he was 4 states away doing his job. And that there was certainly a disconnect between what was intended by the HR person who ordered the snow cone truck to come to the terminal and the actual drivers who were out doing their work. And he felt a little disrespected from, them not thinking about what a driver really is and what a driver's doing, and perhaps how he receives true appreciation and respect. I think those two kind of go hand in hand. So during this week, we work at expressing the appreciation and respect in different ways. Of course, you can give them a little trinket with your logo on it. We're doing that. You can have a little barbecue. We're doing that. But really, it's about personal touch and, as always, relationship. I worked for Waste Management, hiring truck drivers on the western slope of Colorado. This was 16 years ago. And we had a woman who was the director of operations over all these guys, these gruff and tumble trash truck drivers in the mountains of Colorado in September. And she would write a personal note to one person each week. And when you got a Mary Kay note, it was a pretty big deal. You would see it in people's trucks hanging up, or in their office hanging up. And I learned that and made it part of my tool belt, the handwritten note. And so what I've done with this company and what we do here is order blank cards. They got a logo on the front, so they know where it's coming from, but the inside does not express anything except what the manager wants to say to their employee. And the manager can say anything, but it's meant to be for the individual, because praise, appreciation, respect, those are things that are intended for a person, and then they're needed to be tailored, to the end user there, to be sure it's more, but that it's plausible, that it's credible. Instead of just thank you for everything you do, we can do something very, very specific. And that run that you do on Tuesday nights at 9:30, we know that your dad or your kid has a softball game and your dad can't get over there to it. And, we know we can all write that in a personal note. And that's how I feel that appreciation can be expressed really well. It's the personal piece from the manager to the employee.
Personal, intentional, thoughtful, specific. I think that's a really, really good point, because that took time, that took thought, that took genuine, concern and appreciation. So excellent suggestion. And that's, other than taking time, that's easy to do. That's not expensive cost-wise. It just takes time.
Right.
And I think excellent point. And Jason, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your heart, your passion, and our relationship, and your dedication to this industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And thanks for joining me for another episode of Taking the High Road and for spreading the word to your industry peers. We really appreciate it. And remember, you could submit any questions or comments, including those which may appear on upcoming deeper dive segments at podcast@driverreach.com. And don't forget to rate and review Taking the High Road on whatever platform you use to listen. Until next time, thank you for taking the higher road.